everyone, today I have a short video on where I think the Salem witches were buried, and it's been kept a secret because they don't want you going to these locations outside of Salem City. But use your own feelings about it, use your intuition, however you feel about it. If you go there, use your imagination, try to figure out where you think the Salem witches were buried, and know that they do know, they're just not sharing it with us because they don't want people going and digging these people up or moving graves around or just doing what they're not supposed to be doing in private locations where people reside, possibly. And I will give you a little bit of historical information about where I think they're buried and why I think the burial ground is in this specific area. I hope you enjoy the video. Please leave comments if you think that this is a possibility, or if maybe you know where the real location is if I'm wrong. But again, this is just my opinion based on my research and based on my intuition on where I feel that they were buried. So I hope you enjoy. Thank you. The secret to discovering where the Salem witches were buried begins with Rebecca Nurse's house, which you can visit today at 149 Pine Street in Danvers, Massachusetts. I'll leave a link below so that you can check it out if you want to go visit. The reason why Rebecca Nurse's house is the key, or at least one of the keys, to discovering where the witches were buried was because, as legend has it, Rebecca's son Benjamin had gotten into a boat at night to retrieve his mother's body to bring it home to be buried on their property. In one of the sources that I read, he had gone down the brook behind his home to retrieve his mother's body. Some sources say that Benjamin's father, Rebecca's husband Francis, was with him that night in the boat retrieving Rebecca's body. However, I believe that Benjamin acted alone, although his family had known his intentions. And the brook that runs behind their house on their property is Crane Brook, which you can find today. And the path of the brook has not changed since 1692. So you can follow the brook on the map today, and it will line up with the brook on the map of 1692. Now, which way did he go? Which way? He went north. And how do I know he went north? North is Hathorn Hill. Well, northwest, but definitely north. So he took the brook north, and I'll explain how I know this. So bear with me here for a little bit of history. Judge John Hathorn was one of the judges that presided over the Salem witch trials. He was possibly the most important judge. And in this portrait, you can also see, which I find kind of fitting, his hand pointing downward. And this will come into play later on when we talk about where I believe the witches are buried. Judge John Hathorn was also Nathaniel Hawthorne's great-great-grandfather, the author Nathaniel Hawthorne. Now, Nathaniel, I believe, alluded to some of what really happened during the Salem witch trials in his short story Young Goodman Brown. I believe Hawthorne used the allusions to tell future readers what had actually happened because the truth of the matter was covered up and still is covered up today. Only I'm sure a select few families and a select few types of people know what actually happened. But getting back to where I believe the witches are buried, Judge John Hathorn's important because his family owned Hathorn Hill, the property. And I know from living in Salem and going to the property myself and seeing the property, if you're driving through Danvers on Route 1 or 95, you can't miss the Danvers State Hospital that they built on Hathorn Hill. And if you haven't heard about the Danvers State Hospital, there's an interesting story behind that as well. But the state hospital was built on Judge John Hathorn's property. Many people don't know this, and in fact, now the Danvers State Hospital has been transformed into apartments, and I went for a tour of the apartments, and the manager was telling me all about the Danvers State Hospital. But I said, well, didn't Judge John Hathorne live on this property as well? And he looked at me and he goes, wow, I can't believe you know that. Because for me, being a literature geek who was in love with Nathaniel Hawthorne, that was really important to me that it was Judge Hathorne's property. But anyway, getting back to this, I personally feel and have felt that the property itself is cursed because of Judge John Hathorne, not because there was a mental institute located there. So the Hathorne property is definitely, I feel, cursed. What I found interesting too was apparently Nathaniel Hawthorne felt his entire family was cursed because of his great-grandfather's dealings with the witch trials. And Nathaniel Hawthorne also added the W to his last name because he wanted to distance himself from his great-grandfather's connection to the witch trials. So there's the Hawthorne curse. So going north to me on the brook only made sense for that reason. And I also had this weird knowing and this feeling that where they buried the witches would be within eyeshot of Hathorne Hill. So getting back to why I personally feel that Hathorne would want to be able to be in eyeshot of where the burials were or have it near his property or on his property. If they were going to keep the bodies secret, for one, they would want a safe place to bury these bodies, okay? So that's what I mean by Hathorne Hill. I feel the witches were buried within the shadow of Hathorne Hill, meaning eyeshot, okay? And I'm not sure if that's because something John Hathorne wanted, but I get the feeling that that's what it was. So when I did my research here, I found some other interesting things in the research. So firstly, I started by aligning the maps, making sure the brook aligned, and seeing where Rebecca Nurse's son could have gone in his boat at night to find his mother's body. So I went north and I followed the brook because I was heading toward Hathorne Hill to see how far I could get and where that would lead me. So you can see on the map that I followed Beaver Brook north. It's that little yellow, long, squiggly arrow that looks like a child drew it. And this is the path that I believe Benjamin Nurse took that night when he went to retrieve his mother's body. So this is where it gets interesting. If you continue to follow Beaver Brook up just a little bit more, you come to something that's called today Greenleaf Open Space. I'll get back to what that means. But the brook ends a little bit after Greenleaf Open Space. You can see my yellow squiggly lines. So it sort of crosses the highways there, the end of it. So I marked it. But I circled Greenleaf Open Space because this is where I believe the Salem witches were buried. And it's within eyeshot of Hathorne Hill, where the Bradley Danvers is listed on the hill. That's exactly where the Danvers State Hospital was located. The Bradley is the Danvers State Hospital, just changed over to apartments. So you can see from the hill Greenleaf Open Space. So it's within that eyeshot or that shadow of Judge Hathorne's hill. It's that idea of the property being cursed for his part that he played in the witch trials. Oh, and I think it's kind of interesting that in Judge John Hathorne's portrait, he's got his hand pointing down, almost as if he's giving a signal. You know, I'm up here on my hill, and I'm going to point down to where we buried those witches. So Nurse's son Benjamin could have easily have gone up the brook, stopped at what we now know as Greenleaf Open Space, picked up his mom, and then brought her body back to the property to bury her on the property. So while I was doing research, I found something very, very interesting. I do know that Nathaniel Hawthorne had written a short story called The Hollow of the Three Hills. I also feel that that might have been an allusion to where they were buried, but in this case, it looks like there were probably 4 hills surrounding it, but I'm not sure exactly the height of all of the hills. But here you can see the old map of Salem from 1692. In the upper left is Hawthorne's Hill, Judge Hawthorne's property, again, overlooking where they buried the witches. At the very bottom of the map is Rebecca Nurse's house, who was accused, and that's the beginning of Beaver Brook from our map, at least the beginning that the journey her son took to go retrieve his mother's body on the brook. So what I find personally interesting here is the yellow circle surrounding Greenleaf open space, where again I feel that they're buried. Now these are properties of individuals that owned homes in 1692 on the map right around Hawthorne's Hill. So let's start with Mary Putnam at the top. I'm going to start with Mary Putnam because a lot of what's left out here was Putnam property. So there's a lot of Putnam property around Hawthorne Hill. So Mary Putnam, her family were among the accusers. So she's number 39 right next to Hawthorne Hill. So let's go below that to number 45, John Darling. The Darling family were among the accusers as well. Now, we all know the backstory to the Salem witch trials, that there was land to be gained, there was possessions to be gained, money, wealth. And again, this is another reason why Nathaniel Hawthorne felt that his family was particularly cursed, because Judge Hawthorne was one of the many that had gained wealth due to the witch trials. But unfortunately for Nathaniel Hawthorne, through the years, Judge John Hawthorne's family lost their wealth. So Nathaniel felt that this was all a part of the curse. But anyway, just so you know, people were accusing people so that they can gain their assets a lot of times. But it is interesting that we're looking at a bunch of yellow accusers here right around where I feel the witches are buried. So again, you would have a burial being protected by accusers. It's almost like capture the flag. Like, you going to come up on my property and try to steal these witches we're not going to let you have? You know what I mean? Like, of course, Rebecca Nurse's son had to go under the guise of night, especially if it was property of all these accusers. So anyway, getting back to this, John Darling, his family, they were among the accusers. Below Darling's property is number 50, John Hutchinson's property. And, again, the Hutchinson family were among the accusers as well. So let's go over to 51, property number 51, Joseph Whipple. Well, Joseph married Sarah Hutchinson, and again, the Hutchinson family were among the accusers. North of that, we have properties 46 and 47, where we have more Putnam property. 46 was James Putnam, and 47 was Captain John Putnam. So their homes were located right there, and again, the Putnam family were among the accusers. However, what I found even more interesting was number 40, Sarah Osborne. So poor accused Sarah Osborne was the only accused in this inner circle here, and Sarah was accused witch. And what was interesting about this was Alexander Osborne was Sarah's second husband. Sarah's first husband died. Then she married Alexander. But who was Alexander? Alexander was her indentured slave, her family's slave. So she ended up being ostracized by society, and everybody disagreed with how she handled that situation. She went ahead and married Alexander. So we don't really know much about either of their characters other than how they acted during that time period. But we have the indentured slave, now landowner, Alexander Osborne, and his wife is accused of witchcraft and she's put to death. So what did Alexander do right afterward? He remarried into the Sibley, Walcott, and Putnam families. So his new wife was Ruth, who was the widow of William Sibley, who was the brother of Samuel Sibley, whose wife Mary suggested the witch cake, and Mary Sibley was the first wife of Jonathan Alcott. So after he married Ruth Sibley, they joined the church and then were respected members of the community. And after Alexander's death, Sarah Osborne's two sons brought a suit claiming that they had been ill-treated by Alexander and forced to sign away their property rights. So again, that's going to speak to his character and his greed. He took the property away from Sarah's sons and possibly forced that. So who knows if Alexander had made some sort of agreement behind the scenes with maybe the Putnam family, the Walcotts, the Sibleys, who knows. But Alexander, he was going to be on to bigger and better things because married to Sarah, they were again ostracized from society, and possibly he gained more after her death, knowing that he would gain her children's rights to their inheritance, as well as getting whatever he could from marrying Ruth Sibley. Sounds shady to me. Sounds like Jerry Springer stuff. So it seems as if Greenleaf open space was very well protected by land owned by accusers and Judge Jonathan Hathorne. Now, I did some digging myself. And I went back to the Danvers State Hospital, and I can't really see much from that land at this point because they tore down the buildings that were in front of the hospital, and now there are trees there. So it blocks the view. So I drove to Greenleaf Open Space. Now let's get back to what Greenleaf Open Space is. Greenleaf Open Space is a recreation ground that is owned by the town of Danvers. Again, people, Danvers was once Salem in 1692. It is 23 acres. That's another fun one for you. 23, the number seems pretty popular amongst the superstitious. This property is open to the public. And the property has trails that are public trails that you can go on. But not only does it have trails, but it is also conservation land. It is considered a conservation property in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So what does that mean? Conservation land. It means that we can't go searching for bodies of witches. It's protected land. We are allowed to go on the trails, but it is protected land by the state of Massachusetts, owned by the city of Danvers, Massachusetts. It seems as if it's always been protected since 1692. But getting back to my very last sign. So when I drove out there to do the filming, I wasn't aware. I had just researched the old 1692 map and saw that all the accusers, like the Putnams, had all lived in that one area surrounding Greenleaf Open Space. So I wasn't even aware of that at that point, but that further confirms for me that this is the area in which they are buried, especially now that it's protected lands by the state and by Danvers, the city. But also, when I drove out there, I wanted to go onto the trails, but, there are leash laws in the state of Massachusetts. So people need to keep their dogs on a leash. There's a house that's right next to where you can park your car to go walk for the trails. And these people had their two very large black dogs outside. And the closer I got to the trails, the closer the dogs would walk toward me. It was kind of scary, almost like something out of The Omen, like Hounds of Hell, like they were protecting this trail that's supposed to be open to the public. So, not okay. Not okay. And whether they had an invisible fence or not, it's really not fair to people that want to go walking on the trails to let your dogs out like that. You know what I mean? Put up a little sign saying, I have an invisible fence, so my dogs can't cross a certain line. But when they start approaching you, you don't want to go too far from your car. So instead, what I did was I drove around the Greenleaf open space to see if there was a place I could park. And St. John's Prep School is right on top of Greenleaf open space, basically. But I pulled into the parking area, and unfortunately for me, it was like some sort of open day where people could come in and check out the school. So they were probably like, what is this woman doing? So again, I didn't really get out too much. And I started leaving, and as I pulled out of St. John's Prep right next to Greenleaf open space, I look in my rearview mirror, and this was my last sign. And I saw the Danvers State Hospital, now Bradley Apartments, in my rearview mirror. My heart stopped because I knew in that moment that I was right. And I pulled into the parking spot and I took some pictures. Again, this is within the shadow of Hathorn Hill. So it's within eyeshot. I truly believe they were buried here purposefully, and it has been kept a secret from the public, and it's also been protected now by the state and by the city. And I hope you enjoyed the video.